For more than 10 years, a number of our students and staff have continued to return to Nicaragua. The trip is designed to increase awareness about North-South injustice and to give people hands-on experience of living, working, and seeing the world through the eyes of the poor in Latin America. This trip reminds us about the lives of the poor who form the majority of our planet, and it forces us to consider those who are so often neglected and ignored by us in the North. Our prep for the trip was as usual. We got together every week, September through January. We organized, fundraised, did lots of group activities. We learned some Spanish. We studied politics, the history and economics of the region. We discussed our motives and the importance of going to learn and not just help. And we tried to prepare for the surprises and shocks of entering into another culture and world than our own. All of this was good and needed. This year we decided to attend and learn more about North-South realities at the November SOA protest. It took the place of our second weekend retreat. All 25 of us piled into the school bus and we drove 22 hours non-stop to Georgia. There is a huge military base there situated at Fort Benning. It is paid for by taxpayers and run by the U.S. military to train Latin American soldiers. Countless thousands have disappeared, been tortured, assassinated, and massacred by the graduates of the school, most of them simply for speaking out against injustices, inequality, and poverty. 22,000 people gathered there this November to demand that the U.S. government close the school. The experience was empowering, energizing, and tremendously moving. The final day was particularly inspirational. Many in our group took a lead position in what is called the Death March. Draped in black robes and faces painted white, they led a huge funeral procession. All 22,000 people marched behind them, remembering the countless victims of the school. We were reminded that one person or a small group of persons can make a difference. All of us realized that to make a difference we need to take a chance, get involved, and most of all, believe that we are part of a world bigger than ourselves. We learned a lot during those days about differences and injustices that exist between the North and the South.
So when the day finally came to leave for Nicaragua, we thought we were ready. We carried with us more than 40 hockey bags full of donations. We arrived at the airport, eager and excited about heading into the unknown. We landed in El Salvador, then Costa Rica, before finally getting to Managua, the capital of Nicaragua. It was a short ride from the ultra-modern airport to where we were staying that night, but wow, what a different world we had entered. The heat and the smells hit you first, and then we could see houses and buildings made with spare wood and metal slapped together. There were people on horse carts and moto taxis, and people on streets selling whatever they could. Almost all of the buildings had iron bars with broken glass or barbed wire along the roof. And there were open sewers and neon signs plastered in Spanish with unfamiliar words splashed over glossy billboards and scratched on walls. All this was truly different, and we hadn't even gotten off the bus yet. Then the bus stopped at a modest house. We were told this was Casa Canadiense. It was a simple and small house where Canadians are welcome to stay as they get acclimatized to Nicaragua. Half our group stayed there in modest bunk beds, and the rest stayed with local families. The Casa has been instrumental over the years in connecting our groups with projects and communities in Nicaragua and helping us enter into this different world. We could not do this trip without them.
Early the next day we began our tour of the capital. What really surprised us were the contrast between the ultra-rich neighborhoods and the poor ones. The poor lived in neighborhoods where sewage ran in the streets, and houses were made of scrap metals. They often had no access to water or electricity. We were told that the water was turned off for many hours each day, sometimes even days at a time, and brownouts of power were common in the poor areas. Yet the rich neighborhoods had everything in abundance, beautiful green, manicured lawns with gardens. Their houses were huge in comparison. We were told that it was common for them to hire maids, gardeners, nannies, and many rich homes had full-time security to guard their expensive cars and property. The dirt roads in the poor neighborhoods were full of gullies and ridges that made them difficult to drive on in the rainy season. They are pure mud and impossible for vehicles, which means services never reach these areas, services like police and ambulances. The streets in the rich area were paved. Their water and electricity never go off. They have access to all the best services, including fancy new stores and malls, where the poor are excluded. They have expensive car dealerships, banks, and casinos, and brand-name stores like Payless, Price Right, and McDonald's. Their names are in English, a sign that the North is moving in, but these stores were strictly for the rich, and their gates were always guarded by men with guns. The stores for the poor, especially in the large street market, were filled with second-hand goods from the North. We were told that most are contraband and come through the black market. In these same streets there is a high degree of crime, drug use, and prostitution. People sell their bodies for pennies just to get enough to eat. The drug of choice for the poor, particularly poor children, is sniffing glue. It is cheap. It also kills brain cells and fends off the constant ache of hunger pangs. Our bus ride was truly an education in contrasts.
Yet all of this could not prepare us for the stench and horror of the Managua City garbage dump. It is one of the fastest growing neighborhoods in the country. It is estimated 14,000 people live in and around the dump and make their lives skimming through the heaps of rotting food and cast-offs, looking for something to eat or sell. The children who live there walk barefoot through mounds of garbage, searching for buried treasure. If they are lucky enough to find plastic or metal to sell, they might make $1 for the day. This is the average salary for almost 30% of all Nicaraguans, and more than 50% survive on less than $2 a day. We could hardly stand the smells and sights for the 10 or 15 minutes we drove through in our comfortable bus. It is impossible to imagine what it is like for people to live this way, day in and day out. Yet this is how it is in many parts of the world where people are forced off the land and have no choice but to move into city garbage dumps to survive. They fashion makeshift homes out of the cardboard and whatever they can find. They know the best trucks to follow. They follow the ones from rich neighborhoods or from fancy restaurants. They are ready with their sticks and picks to begin grabbing for food. There is a group that has opened a school in the dump for the children. It is a sign of hope in the midst of this hell. There is a huge problem with AIDS. Family violence is epidemic. It truly is a hell. So many live here amid the stench and smoke, surrounded by squalor and debris. There are vultures everywhere, reminders of the death that lurks all too near. Our first day finished with a long, difficult sharing about all we had seen and heard.
Early the next day, we got up, packed and traveled to meet our families who would welcome us into their homes for the next 10 days. The community is called Aguas Agrias. Translated, this means bitter waters. For many in the group, these days would be among the most challenging and difficult in our entire lives. The first huge difference for us as we met our families and moved our mountain of supplies into their homes was to realize how little they had. Most of the houses were made of 2 rooms. They had cleaned out what little they had to give us their best spaces. It was hard getting used to their simple food, the poverty, and the darkness. We knew before we came that they had no access to electricity, but it was different living this way. It was like moving back centuries in time to a world without light and technology. There were a couple of families who had radios, but other than that, our evenings were filled with silence and starlight. No TV, no computers, no fridge, no running water. Our families were up at the crack of dawn to feed their animals and begin their day. All of them cooked over wood fires. Their kitchens were made of boards and tin and detached from their houses. Animals wandered in and out all the time. It was a daily ritual to see the cows or pigs walk by the front porch on their way to grazing. Since there was no light except for our flashlights, we all went to bed early. And by 4 a.m. the next morning, the dogs and roosters began the ritual of announcing the new day. We slept under mosquito nets and on top of new mattresses and cots they had purchased just for us. We drank filtered water after it came from the river, and meals took some getting used to. Some had beans and rice for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Others were treated to an assortment of fruits, sweetbreads, and more. And because of the language barriers, we had to get used to a lot of silence.